Good evening, everyone. I'm Evie Evans with Chatham Community Library, and I want to welcome you all to CCL's virtual commemoration of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This event is also a part of Chatham 250's lecture series chronicling the histories of communities of color in Chatham County. Now, we're fortunate tonight to have Rita Van Dynen, who's our library manager, providing some technical support for the discussion. So if you have any technical issues, if you'd please send her a private chat, she'll try to help you work those out. So my last function tonight is to introduce our moderator, Ana Ressa-Versola. She's the managing editor of Chatham Magazine for Shannon Media Incorporated. She was born in Manila, Philippines, and grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism from UNC Chapel Hill and a multidisciplinary master's degree from Duke University. She is a published author and the co-founder of Southern Mix, a project that collects stories from Asians and Asian Americans living in the South. Her career includes work as a newspaper reporter, a professional photographer, a producer, and global clinical development director at GlaxoSmithKline. So now, without further ado, I'll turn the session over to Ana Ressa-Versola.
Thanks, Evie. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited that we are going to talk together and interact here online. Wish it was in person, but maybe in another few months we can make that happen. I want to introduce the panelists for this evening, and I really want this to be more of a conversation around the issues that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders face on a nearly daily basis. And I want people to feel free to share also some of their own personal stories. I think it would be useful for us to have that kind of in real life connection. And I would like to first start with Ed Binet. He is the president of the Asian American Outreach. And you can see here, hopefully you can see my screen. Can everybody see my screen now? Excellent. And you can hear in my own voice that I do not have the signature accent from the Philippines, and it's showing that I grew up here. I came over when my father was finishing his medical training, and so I was still a toddler when I came to the US, and my parents insisted on us becoming very American as soon as possible. And so I don't have the language skills that I once had when I was much younger. And Ed has the great fortune of having retained his language skills. Yes. And Ed, if you want to say a few things about yourself, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Ressa. And I really appreciate you inviting me to this panel discussion. And my son actually used to live in Pittsburgh, so I kind of know where Chatham County is. And again, my name is Ed Binet. I kind of changed it years ago when I first arrived here to Binet, because the Filipino pronunciation of that is Binanay. And then when I went to work in the corporate world, they always say, what? So I called my mom and said, please, can I change it to Binet? I said, you can change it, but don't change the spelling. So it's still Ed Binanay. So I'm Ed Binet. So I'm actually a first generation Filipino American. I arrived in the US in 1977. So I have been here for the past 44 years. And it's so funny, I just had a chance to meet Vasant Patel with Meet the Patels, and his son Ravi mentioned that when his dad arrived from India to the US, he had $6 in his pocket. I had $32. So I was richer than Vasant Patel when I arrived from the Philippines. But a quick story. So I arrived from Manila and then to San Francisco and flew to Philadelphia. And the flight stewardess offered me a beer and said, sure, you know, and she opened it and handed it to me, and she said, that's $2, please. So reluctantly, I took $2 and paid her. I was bummed. So technically, I only had $30 when I first arrived in the US and started a new life. But my first job was a dishwasher in the Italian restaurant in Philadelphia. Cried every night and called my mom every other night and said, I want to go home. You know, I did not go to college to be a dishwasher, but I persevered and worked my way up in the corporate world, became a sales director for Baxter Healthcare and managed a $75 million region. And I then became a development director at UNC Chapel Hill, and now runs a nonprofit, as Reza say, called Asian Pacific Islander Outreach, to encourage Asians to be part of the electoral process. So my story is not unique. You know, I hear many similar experiences from other immigrant community, but the one thing is for sure is that I am proud to be an American. Made quite a life here, raised 2 boys, and this is my home. And I'm glad to be here tonight.
Thanks, Ed. I see Ya. I see you from here up. Oh, there you are. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. Yeah, you are the first Asian American council member for Cary, which and Cary is so diverse compared to other surrounding areas, particularly in Chatham County. And I'd like for you to say a few things about yourself for everyone here online.
Thank you for inviting me to this great event. I'm Yalu, Cary Town Council member. So I ran for public office in 2019. It was the first time I ran for public office. I was born in China and I came to the United States right after college. So I've been here for over about 18 years. Came here to pursue my graduate studies, got my master at Georgia State University, and then came to NC State and got my PhD in sociology there. Started working at Duke as a faculty member, and then I got another doctoral degree. Right, we Asians are known for being very good academically, but it's probably too much, you know, for me. That I got another doctoral degree. I got my JD from NC Central. It's an evening program, so I got my JD while I worked at Duke, and I finished the 4-year program within 3 years. I have 3 beautiful children. I raised my kids here, and this is my home. It's quite a year since I got elected to Cary Town Council. Cary has one of the largest Asian population in the state. 18% of our citizens are actually Asian Americans. Our population size in Cary is about 170,000. So you do the math. So we have a sizable Asian population there. So I'm very proud to represent this demographic, and I look forward to hearing the insights from other panelists and questions from the audience.
Thank you, Ya. So I'll turn to Steve. Steve is, I met Steve years and years ago when his daughter and my daughters danced at Cary Ballet Conservatory. And
Yes.
I would go and pick up my daughters from the different schools in Chatham County, and then we'd race down Highway 64 to make it in time for classes at Cary Ballet Conservatory. And there was just such a stark difference between the demographic population in Chatham versus Cary. And I had an opportunity to have different conversations with Steve. At the time, I think you were just starting to dip your toe in the local politics. there in
Yes,
Morrisburg.
yes, and thank you so much. And I hope you can hear me. I'm having my
Yep,
Wi-Fi
we
cut
can
in
hear
and out today, a little bit slow. But first of all, it's an honor to be here. I want to thank you, Anna, and it's an honor to be here with Ed and Yalu and everybody here. And yeah, we met many years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago when my daughter was doing Carrie Ballet. She's now a sophomore at UNC, Chapel Hill, a journalism major. And our son, Ryan, is a sophomore at Panther Creek and going to be junior next year. But, my story is different, very different than Yalu or some of the, Satish Girl whom I served with. I'm the son of immigrants from India. My father came to the United States in 1968 to become a surgeon. And I come from a line of politicians. My great-grandfather was the Speaker of the House in the largest state in India, Tamil Nadu, and he left to join Mahatma Gandhi's freedom movement, civil disobedience movement. And my mom's father was a major in World War II. And so I grew up in West Virginia, but when I grew up there, there was only, 5 Indian American families and a couple of Filipino families. And so we all became very close. And I never ever thought I would get into politics. So I jumped in. One of my influences was a guy named John Amores, who was the first Filipino American in the continental United States to serve in the legislature. And he became one of the rising senior guys in the legislature. And he actually got out of politics, lives in Arizona now. But I guess in 2010, I ran for county commission, lost, and came back a year later when a seat opened up in the council and won when Tom Murray, my friend, who's a Republican, he went on the legislature. And I'm a Democrat, but I'm very bipartisan. He said, Steve, you ought to run. And so I run. And then I've been in the council now for 11 years. I served for a few years as mayor pro tem. And so I've been in for 3 terms and dabbling in some radio and TV commentating. So it's been fun to be a part of the team. I want to really thank Ed and all the different organizations for making a difference. And what drives me every day as I close out is that, my late father-in-law was a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, served alongside my mother-in-law. So I married the colonel's daughter, plural. So proud. Every day I saw them when they wore their military uniforms. And, I remember one day having dinner with him when I first got married in Florida. And he told me that I met him for dinner. I was there on a business trip, that the reason he came to America was when he saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon, he was so inspired to come to this country. And he died about 3 years ago, but I often think about that. And I think the conversation we're having today is so relevant in terms of the message that we're sending to other parts of the world. So someone like my father-in-law or Ed or Yalu or Anna or any of one of these immigrants can come to America, right? So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thanks, Steve. And Shawn, you are the youngest among us here on the panel. And Shawn just graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. He was a Moorhead Kane Scholar there. And I know, so impressive. And, but something that even impressed me more about Shawn is his approachability and his ability to take a large, complex issue and distill it where a lot of people can understand and relate to it. Shawn, I don't think you understand that that is a very precious skill to have. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to everyone here, and then we'll get started on some of the questions we've got.
Sure, and thank you for the kind introduction, Rissa. So as she said, I'm Shawn. I'm a recent graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. I think, why I think Rissa reached out to me to invite me here is because I was one of the students who helped found UNC's recently established Asian American Center. And so, my interest in Asian American activism and issues, born and raised in Tampa, Florida, but came to UNC. But, growing up in the United States, I was always interested in American history, specifically the history of the civil rights movement. But I remember even in high school, talking about Black civil rights leaders, gay civil rights leaders, feminist civil rights leaders, et cetera, but always wondering where Asian Americans belong in that conversation. And so when I came to UNC as an American history major, I was really interested in discovering the answer to that question. But unfortunately, I found that UNC as an institution and a lot of other universities in the American South couldn't provide the education that could equip me to understand, what role my grandfather, who emigrated to Kentucky, where he would have sat on a segregated bus, during the Jim Crow South. And so really through the collaborative effort of community organizing, generous philanthropic donors, along with wonderful professors, staff, etc., the past 4 years at Carolina, we've been able to make the Asian American Center get off the ground. And so that's been, certainly my most fulfilling experience the past 4 years of undergrad. And very excited to see where it's going to go moving forward. People would always ask me, what is the purpose of having an Asian American Center? And fundamentally, it relates so well to this conversation we're having today, because I've always said that, fundamentally, the Asian American Center is about teaching all people, whether you're Asian American or not, that Asian folks who live in the United States are a part of the American fabric as well. And so that's a really powerful message, especially in the past few months where, we've seen an increase in anti-Asian violence. And I hope that's one that, we can remember moving forward.
Thanks, Shawn. So I'm happy to see that we've got a good crowd here. I know that we have lots of questions, and I wanted to be able to share my screen so that folks can see some of the background information that we're going to review, and also some information that will inform our discussion. One of the first things I wanted to raise with folks on the call is that a lot of times when you meet an Asian American person who is an American citizen, because we do not look what some people stereotypically assume is an American look, we are many times considered a perpetual foreigner. So where are you from? How long have you been here? What does your family do? Just, when you're getting to know someone, you kind of want to know their background. But growing up in the South, I often encountered people who were who really didn't know much about the Philippines, and also who didn't know much about Asian American history. And I know that Ed is proud of this factoid where, some of the earliest Asian Americans recorded in history, US history, are the Filipino soldiers who jumped from the Spanish galleons and made it to shore. And in some cases, they would jump from, they would land in Mexico and then make their way over to the area at what's now a settlement off the coast of Louisiana. And so there is a place there in Louisiana where it's recognized as some of the earliest Asians coming on US territory. So, well, at the time it wasn't US territory, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, so the bottom line is that we've been here for, I'm sorry, Reza, anything else?
No, that was it.
Yeah, so the bottom line is that we've been here in the United States for a long time. I made a speech in Raleigh against the Asian, to support Senator Chaudhry's bill on Asian hate. And I kind of gave the folks a history that, as Reza said, we've been here since the 16th century. The first Asians documented was in, I believe, 1587. And by the way, this was when Filipinos landed in California, Reza. Mm-hmm. And in 1763, the Manila men that you mentioned jump shipped from a Spanish galleon and landed in Louisiana. In fact, 2 years ago, I visited Louisiana and went to this town and met some of those Filipinos from the 1700s, which was unbelievable.
You mean descendants?
I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, the descendants, yeah, from 1763. So, and the Chinese arrived in 1778, in Hawaii, and 1788, I think the first Hawaiian arrived from Hawaii to the States. Then the Japanese arrived in Hawaii in 1806, the Koreans in 1884, and then the Vietnamese in 1912, and the South Asians came in 1907. So we were part of this immigration process from Southeast Asia and eventually called America home. But this idea that, we're always foreigners, just people always ask me and said, where are you from? My first sales job, the person that I was trying to sell something, he said, where are you from, boy? And he said, are you Mexican? He said, no. And I was gonna say I'm from Hawaii, but I just said I'm Filipino. So we've been here forever, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I guess I'll take a stab at it. First of all, I think that my experience is different because most of the Asian Indian Americans, a majority of them came in the late 1960s when President Nixon was president. He changed the law to allow Indian and doctors and Asian doctors to come in without having to go to med school again. So he came into America like my father, and he was a surgeon at 23. And, I think, and now that you've got another flood in the 90s coming in through technology, about 40% of our population in Morrisville is Indian, although we're smaller than Cary. And we probably have about 80,000, 90,000 in Wake County. So, and we're waiting for the census numbers. But with that being said, growing up, I often, it was very different than where my kids are growing up here because there was only 4 or 5 Indians in the state. And people would often ask, India at that time was a developing country. So when I said my parents were from India, they didn't know, well, are you Cherokee or Navajo? I mean, they didn't know, where is India? Where is India, right? It was a poor country. It was a developing country. This was before the technology revolution. This was before Sanjay Gupta. This was before Kamala Harris and Nikki Haley and, Meg Murthy and many of these Indian Americans that are part of the mainstream now society, right? So I guess my answer to your question is, I think one of the things that we can do to rebut this notion of being foreign is the economic contribution that we make. That 32% of our graduates are of STEM graduates are Asian, 61% of PhDs. We wouldn't have a Zoom, we wouldn't have a Google, we wouldn't have Yahoo, many of these companies if we didn't have immigrants. And the Asian community is just such a great example of immigrants who have come in and transformed the economy and brought such good cultural transformation. So I think that's what we have to do, is to educate the public. But because of President Trump and this whole, and we're going to talk about that racism in a minute, there's been this notion of you're foreign, get out of our country. If we passed immigration reform today in North Carolina to accelerate skill-based immigration, we have about 50,000 waiting for the green cards. We would add 790 million to our GDP in North Carolina. So, wow. I mean, that's a huge fact of the economic contributions that we.
Yeah. Wow. Did you have any comments to add to some of that contribution that Steve just summarized, which is mind-blowing? Oh, you're muted.
I agree with what has been said by Ed and Steve. I think Asian Americans are just a part of the American fiber from the beginning, right? We are still seen as perpetual foreigners, but we've been here for a long time and we've made contributions along the way, from building the railway to even during this COVID, how many Asian Americans who are fighting on the front line to save lives, and the rich culture that we've contributed, the Asian restaurants, right? So many people love Indian food and Chinese food and Japanese food, right? And we contribute so much to this country. And I was at a anti-Asian hate rally in Chapel Hill. There were some teenagers expressing their disappointment and frustrations in the wake of, Atlanta shootings. And like, a teenager said, "I'm American." And I felt so sad when I heard that, right? They were born here and this is the only country they know. That's their motherland. But they still need to declare that they are Americans. It's just sad to hear. And there's so much that we can do to raise awareness and fight racism in this society.
Thank you. Yeah. And Shawn, I was just going to turn to you.
I was just going to add that, all the points that and Steve are talking about are so pertinent in regards to the creation of the Asian American Center. I think a lot of these problems start with our education system growing up, right? The fact that and I'm sure not many other students learn about this type of Asian American history that Ed knew all the dates of. That was so impressive, but Ed knew all the dates of. We didn't learn this, at least I didn't learn this in high school or middle school and elementary school. I remember, last year when I was doing my whole lobbying for the Asian American Center, I would stop around various Asian student interest organizations at UNC. I stopped by the Asian American Students Association, the largest, group. They had one of their all club or all body interest meetings. I stopped there, I presented about the Asian American Center, and I asked the crowd of about 100 students, raise your hand if you can name one Asian American civil rights activist. And out of the over 100 people there, probably only less than 5 people raised their hands, right? And I think, this problem of this perpetual foreigner, it starts with the fact that we don't see ourselves represented in the curriculum, in business leaders, economic leaders. That's why, it's such an honor for me to be on a call with and Steve, who I hope in 20 years, I hope and Steve are both United States Senate. I know that, they're slowly breaking barriers for me that, my generation, when we come of age, it'll be easier for us to run for office, become executives, etc. So it's just really exciting in that regard.
That's great. That's
Hey,
great.
Reza, can I just one quick point? If you get sick today, and I think mentioned this, up to 10 to 15% of the healthcare workers in America they're from Asia. So 10 to 15%. Think about that. Well, there's so many Filipino nurses, that's like, but Indian doctors, Chinese doctors. So if you get sick and you've been taken care by an Asian, thank them for that. So.
Yes, absolutely. And all these numbers I'm coming up with, folks, I'm a board member of New American Economy. So believe me, I'm not that smart. I do have a photographic memory, but there's these are all, it's a bipartisan group of immigration reform that highlights some of the points Ed made, that 15% of the workforce in healthcare, and the Asian Americans contribute over 16 billion in state and federal taxes, local taxes, and 170 billion more to our economy. So there's a huge economic contribution that we make, and from the innovation, the vaccine research, the jobs that we're creating.
Right.
I think that somehow we need to make sure that we're educating folks about.
Right. So Steve, to that point, would you mind if after the call, if you wouldn't mind gathering some materials, and I'd love for that to be shared and as a resource for
absolutely. And I just wanted to interject that point, and but also and I mean, just having Shawn here, I mean, I cannot emphasize to you, my daughter was a finalist for the Moorhead Cain a few years ago, but to be a Moorhead Cain scholar, I mean, you are in the company of Governor Roy Cooper and many, many greats. And I actually think Shawn will be a U.S. Senator or Congressman or Governor. Roy Cooper was a Moorhead Cain. But when I look at the younger generation, my own daughter being a journalism major at UNC, I think there's unlimitless potential that these young children have, number one. The number two thing I will say is that Yalu and Satish Garamella and those immigrants actually in a higher pedestal than me, or even Jay Chaudhary, although I love Jay Chaudhary, but I'm a huge fan of his. But they were immigrants that came from another country. And that's why I have a tremendous respect for Satish Garamella too, from Mumbai, because they were educated in another country and now they're serving in the government.
yes.
And so I had it a little bit easier in that, you know, I was born here and
Apologies.
raised here. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that for immigrants to come in and win elections in America is outstanding.
Yes, well, I think it speaks to the sense of patriotism and that we are proud
And
Americans.
courage.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, not to say that it wasn't hard for me. I was the first one. I speak a little bit of Indian, but not 4 languages like Garabella. And I often joke that, you know, I grew up on bluegrass music, but I enjoy Indian music now. You know, I never thought I would live in a town or a region with so much Indian influence. So I can start my day with South Asian cuisine and a coffee, listen to Indian radio, and go to Kokabooth Amphitheater to celebrate Indian Diwali. And in between it, I can have a banh mi sandwich and have. So, you know, there's just so much diversity and culture that we can enjoy.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So if I could just interrupt, there is a question in the chat. Raisa, do you want to address that now, or do you want to save those?
Sure. Let's go ahead and do that.
So Kathy Zinn asked that you all address the idea of Asians as the model minority and how that affects you, yourself, and Asians as a community. And Ed, I'd like to circle back with you, and I'll do it via email. I'd like you to recommend a resource for that incredible timeline that you recited, because I'd like to get it and add it to our collections.
For sure, I will go ahead and do that. Just send me the email.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Rita, I can also share with you several of the books that I use as resource to build this outline that I've shared on screen. Excellent,
thank you.
So I'd like to address that first about being the model minority. I was born pre-med, but I became a journalist. And when I was at Carolina in a pre-med track, I discovered the newsroom, and I really was drawn to that. And I became a huge disappointment to my parents for not following in that track of becoming a doctor. And so I had to just kind of go against the expectations of being, you know, a Filipino. And so, but there were also a lot of stereotypes. You know, when I would get cornered in the hall or confronted at the cafeteria, people would make assumptions that that I knew karate or judo and could defend myself with martial arts. And while later I did learn karate, I did not know it while growing up. And so there were other assumptions as well about speaking English, and assumed that I was good at math, and I didn't like math. So, and I know that other Asians have, well, maybe with the exception of Shawn, have had experiences about people making assumptions that you're going to be a Moorhead Kane scholar. So, but Steve or Ed, any comments there? And I'll mute because the wind is picking up out here.
So is your question, well, I'll let Yalu go first and Ed.
So, I mean, we sort of carry this hat like model minority, but in reality, there is so much discrimination against the Asian community and many Asian Americans. And so this model, you know, minority sort of label sort of prevents people from seeing that picture, right? And we have a very large income and economic inequality within the Asian community. It's such a diverse community within the Asian community, right? So it's quite a significant number of Asian Americans live in poverty, and we don't really talk about that. So, and I've heard so many stories. Asian Americans, they express some racism they experience at workplace, at schools, and I really don't think the model minority label is helpful at all.
Yeah, I fully agree there with Ya. If you think about this, and I know we're going to talk more about this, about the Asian attacks that recently, that there's been 3,800 attacks so far, but there's a lot of unreported cases, because as a model Asians, and we hear this from the first generation older folks saying, don't make waves, don't report it to the police. So they see us as meek people that don't resist. And that's not the case at all. We go out there now and tell the people that, hey, this is injustice that's being done to us. So we're meek and a model. And as Ya said, there's a lot of poor Asians and people that are working in factories. So Asian Americans I think it's a bad stereotype, but the only way for us to overcome that is obviously through education and, saying things like, how many times have you heard this when I meet somebody said, oh, you're from the Philippines? I said, yes, I'm from the Philippines. Oh, do you know Jose Vergara? I said, yeah, I do. There's only 100 million Filipinos in the Philippines. So sometimes you just laugh. It's like, really? You don't know that there's 100 million Filipinos in the Philippines? I mean, and you ask this question. So
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think my perspective this is a tough one for me. I mean, first of all, these conversations are a bit uncomfortable for me because growing up, my father, who was very tough on us, almost when basically it's, basically said, if you're the victim of this discrimination or whatever, just don't let yourself be a victim and just work harder. And I definitely wasn't the brightest kid like Shawn, but I worked so hard. I mean, I work, today, 15 to 16 hours a day. I don't think I was a top tennis player, and I don't know any other way. So I had to compensate for my lack of brain power with just my work ethic, right? And so, but I think a lot of Asian Americans are like that. So when you say model minority, we don't realize how hard we've worked to get there. And part of this culture, it's a cancer in America, racism. I serve on the League of Municipalities Task Force for Race and Equity, which is focused more on systemic racism towards Black Americans. But I think the biggest problem is the bias. And you cannot diagnose on a medical exam. You cannot prescribe a medication or take a vaccine, but we know it exists in the hearts of Americans. And we had a president that encouraged it, that said that minorities were taking away jobs. And I think the best medication we can do to cure this cancer is to have uncomfortable conversations, right? And so opening up and talking about how we can address racism for what it is. But I think we're called a model minority, many of us, because of the sacrifices that we've made. The final thing I'll say, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, but I can only speak to my own experiences. But I believe that in my own lifetime, I could not compare my experience of racism to a Black American, because my parents came from India, but our ancestors did not come on slave ships. Although there was some slavery in other parts of the Caribbean and there's still the caste system in India, but there wasn't the 100 years of systemic bias and racism. So when my parents came, they were here for a short time, became a doctor, and then they made it in society, right? So that's something that I've become more aware of. But I can tell you that what we're seeing today is just unbelievably ridiculous. I mean, to see grandmothers and people beaten, just hurt, people are targeted just because they're racist. And it's the silence of some of the leaders in power that have allowed this to go on, including the President of the United States. And so I'm sorry I've offended any Republicans, but my statement isn't as a Democrat or Republican. It's simply as an American, right? I want to reiterate that because I have many Republican friends, right? But I hope that's helpful to in terms of my answer.
So Rita, would you mind sharing? I see that there's some more questions. Would you mind sharing another question?
So I'm just seeing a link that Shawn has shared and also a quote that reads, "May your curse in life be that your hard work is constantly mistaken for talent." And Shawn says, I think that resonates with many Asian Americans.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I did want to share also that these are some of the questions that I know that that have come across in several different arenas and settings, and I wanted to be able to capture those questions here. And one of the things that I know that we probably won't have a chance to discuss in detail, but because of the rise in violence and bias and some of the feelings of hatred toward other Asians and Asian Americans, there are resources available, and one of them that was particularly helpful was a website, an organization called Holla Back, and it's in this last reference paragraph here. And so if anyone is here on the call and is interested in learning more about what resources are available, what training is available. So if you see someone being discriminated against, then you have tangible steps and ways to not just be a passive bystander, but someone who can either record on video or to report what they see. And I think that we have an opportunity now with the greater awareness to make our voices heard. And I think this is one of the places that you can go to for more information. And I'm happy for anyone to continue making any comments toward that. Steve or Ya or Shawn, Ed. And then,
well, the one thing I just would like to just highlight is the fact that President Biden and Congress has passed recently passed the hate crime bill, anti-hate crime bill, and all of the senators voted except for one, Josh Hawley, and then all the congressmen in the House voted except for 62 Republicans. And in North Carolina, all the Republicans voted no for this bill, and only one Republican said yes to the bill. So, it's a bipartisan effort, and people truly understand that there's a problem here. And I don't know if you know what's in the bill, but it's really a very simple bill, the way I look at it. The Department of Justice is involved in terms of ensuring that there's tracking on potential prosecution of people that have committed these crimes. And then also the Department of Justice will ensure that they offer guidelines to local and state law enforcement. And then, the one thing also in this bill, there's really 5 tenets, I call it. It urges the Health and Human Services and DOJ to remove any discriminatory language in how agencies talk about the pandemic, meaning don't call it the Kung flu virus. And then also this reporting data is so important that they're going to have some money allocated to that. And then pushing all the judges to be involved in sentencing for hate crimes. So there's only 5 tenets of the bill, and I can't understand why 62 Republicans said no to this. But it's there to hopefully protect our grandmothers and our Lolos and Lolas from attacks.
Thanks for sharing that, Ed.
Yeah.
Ed, you made a very good point that it's so important for our for the Asian community to be politically involved. Vote, is so important. Elect the candidates, and our president, the senators, congressmen, and and U.S. senators who represent our values, who would fight for our safety and our rights.
Yes.
Now, increasingly, the Asian community is sort of, it's viewed as sort of a community can vote for Democrats and Republicans. So we are sort of the margin of victory. We can be the margin of victory, and we can decide an election. In North Carolina, the size of our Asian population can decide many elections at the state level, at the federal level, and at the local level. We can make a difference.
Yeah, I agree with Yalu. I mean, she and I are working a lot. We work together on the Biden campaign, but getting our community to vote in all elections, state elections, federal elections, local elections, even to the cities, the school boards, it's so important. And I really commend President Biden for pursuing the legislation of Asian American crime and actually getting it bipartisan support. And I really commend Senator Fouché, Senator Chaudhary for leading these efforts, along with Senator Mohammed for our own Asian American hate crime bill. I just really wish in North Carolina, if we can get bipartisan support in the US Congress and Senate, we should be able to do that in North Carolina. And I think we have to continue to support Senator Chaudhary in these efforts to make sure that we can get these reforms done, right? And because I think it's so very important. And the final thing I'll say is that, because my great grandfather was a freedom fighter, one of the things I'm amazed about is how many of the greatest revolutions in the world happen with a few people that had to get very uncomfortable. So if you look at Gandhi, they thought he was crazy. He wanted to free himself from the British Empire. Or, Thurgood Marshall, Dr. King. Many of these movements were started with people who just could not accept the world for what it was. And so I think it's so important for us to understand not the way that these leaders, we tend to get together and, I'll give you an example. MLK holiday is a great holiday, but many Indian Americans or Asian Americans don't go to the prayer breakfast. I spoke a few years ago at it because there's this notion, well, it's really a holiday for a Black American, but they forget that the very principles of Gandhi was what Dr. King was reading when he adopted the civil disobedience movement, right? And the same freedom that he was fighting for is the same concept, that we should not be judged by our color of our skin, but by the content of our character.
Right.
And so this is something that binds and unites us all as Americans.
Yeah.
So I'm inspired because of the Shawn Lins of the world, because what I'm seeing is that I'm an old guy, 20 years, 30 years, hopefully I'll be a grandfather, and I don't know, maybe I'll be a advisor to Shawn when he's president. But maybe I could be president, and Biden's 78, but I don't think that's. But the point is that it's about coming together, but I think the younger generation has a great opportunity to change the country now, because the country is run by a lot of older people now, which is a good thing. I'm glad Biden is in there, but sooner or later there's going to be an aging out.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a transformation of power to a younger generation.
Right.
And I think that's when America will really, but we're starting the seeds right now.
Yes. So no pressure, Shawn.
President, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to add is, I studied American history in undergrad, and big American history buff, at least I try to be. And I think sort of going off Steve's point, the really beautiful thing about this country that I know my parents love and I know that many of us love is the fact that the American identity is not bounded by skin color, religion, sexual orientation, etc. I'll send a link here actually, but it makes me remember that Thomas Jefferson, he sent a letter to his friend Henry Lee sometime in the 1800s on the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And he was saying that, the important thing about the Declaration of Independence wasn't, anything related to class, gender, religion, anything like that. But really it was it captured the spirit of the American mind, right? Something that any person in the entire world can embody, civic values, democracy, etc. And I find that to be the most beautiful thing. And I think, the second point I wanted to say is, I remember when I came to UNC as a first year, people told me that UNC would never establish an Asian American Studies program or have any Asian American programming because folks for the past 30, 40 years at UNC have been trying to do that, but to no avail. But like Steve said, what eventually got it done was a group of thoughtful, committed people who wanted to see the change that they wanted to have. They put their heads together, organized, created a strategy, and that's how you make change in America. And of course, it's difficult at times, but with enough perseverance and enough tact, you can get the right things done, or at least make it better for future generations. So I'm excited, to see what the Asian American Center turns into 5 to 10, 15 years from now, as it sort of continues to help Asian Americans understand their racial identity.
Thanks,
Hey,
Shawn.
hey, Reza, just
Go ahead.
a quick comment. Can you guys see me or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, good. So Steve said something about voting, and I just read this last week that Asians actually started voting heavily in the 2020 elections. Did you guys know that 63% of the Asians voted for Biden compared to 31% to Trump? Did you all know that?
No.
The damage that President Trump has done to the Asians is really felt by the community, and they showed it in the ballot box. Listen to this, Steve. You have to be proud of this. 65% of Asian Indians, 65% voted for Biden. Japanese, 61%. Korean, 57%. The Chinese, 63%. Filipinos, unfortunately, because of the Catholic religion, we only voted 54% for Biden. And then the Vietnamese have voted heavily for Trump, which is 45% for Trump and 36% for Biden. But the bottom line of this message is that we vote and we remember. And, politicians should realize that
Yeah.
we are the biggest, largest growing voting bloc in the country. And if they care for what we believe in our values, then they should support us.
Yeah, and I think it's important for these political parties, there's an opportunity to reach out to these voters. And oftentimes, I think the Democratic Party is making more of an effort, but the Republican Party is also making an effort, and it's going to be interesting to see if Trump doesn't run again and whether Nikki Haley would emerge. And I find that to be interesting that you'd have if Biden didn't run again, you'd have Kamala Harris versus Nikki Haley.
Right.
We'd be guaranteed a woman president. But I think it's so important that we engage with the communities and have them vote. And as just a little light humor, my father has been a Republican for 50, 60 years, and there was a big day about a year and a half ago in the Row House when my daughter's a progressive Democrat, a real progressive. He said, I've made a decision. I'm going to become an independent. And the whole family laughed and clapped, and my granddaughter gave him a kiss, my mom gave him a hug, and then my mother went to him, and she's now a Democrat, and she said, well, you became a Democrat? And he goes, don't push it. But I know that he's moving more, he's one of those Republicans that I think, was a Republican for different reasons, right? But saw it just the impact it was having on his kids, his grandkids. He just couldn't do it anymore, right?
Right. Well, I do have a question. I know that we're coming to the last part of our discussion here, but this is more a question from me for Steve and Ya. Chatham County, when I moved to Chatham County, that was in 2002, we had only a 1% population of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So now in this last census, we have cleared 2%. So we've doubled in our demographics in the last 10 or so years. And then Shawn, this is interesting for you. When I went to Carolina in the 80s, I was one of only a few dozen undergraduate Asian American students at Carolina. And so now to see the campus and to know that there's an Asian American Center on site to support students who, and I really do wish that I'd had that resource at the time. But I think that it does take time to build up a bolus of people who are able to support a change. And I think your generation and the one after will continue to accelerate in some of those changes. So, but for Steve and if you could address some of the growth that's kind of moving into Chatham County, and Morrisville having such a high percentage of Asian Americans, and the diversity in Cary also is starting to push into Chatham County. Can either of you speak to that?
Well, I guess I can take a start. I mean, I think a lot of the, first of all, I'm seeing a lot of new immigrants from Indian community coming in. One thing people don't realize about India, it's a lot like the former Soviet Union. The loyalty is actually to the states, not as much the country. So it really depends on whether you're from Hyderabad, Andhra Pradesh, Mumbai, Punjab, Maharashtra. Hindi is the national language and English, but each cuisine, each food, each dialect is unique. So you have almost a compilation in Morrisville of almost every state in India represented right here in Morrisville and in Cary. So it's tremendous diversity that I've never seen in my own lifetime. Only when I was living in West Virginia, my parents would teach me about the different states in India, but I can see every state in India right in Morrisville, in Cary, right? So I'm learning a lot about the culture, but the growth we're seeing is phenomenal. And I think they're coming here. I can speak about the Indian community, but I'm sure the Chinese community is the universities, the research, the technology jobs. We have 3 Hindu temples in Morrisville. We have 1 in Cary. So, very close to this from a Hindu faith. And I think that's helped a lot with having many of these people coming from Boston or California or New Jersey right here. So the growth has been phenomenal. And I know for Yalu to say 18% is Asian American in Cary, a town, one of the 6th largest city or town in the state. That's big, right? So I can just speak to that, but I think it's a great opportunity because we have so many ambassadors now here that can tell their regions of India. So Infosys recently came here and created 2,000 jobs in North Carolina, and they're headquartered in Bangalore. But there could be somebody with a connection in India that could say another Indian company wants to come in. So North Carolina, because of that reason, opened up an office with the flag of North Carolina for any Indian multinational that, and so they report to Chris Chung and the governor. But I think that's a great opportunity to leverage this growth and to enjoy the tremendous culture that we have here as well. Yeah, Councilmember.
Yeah. So part of Cary is actually in Chatham County. So with the size of Asian population in Cary has been grown, has grown a lot, and being so close, to Cary and Wake County, I'm now surprised to see the growth, happening in Chatham County, and I think the Asian population will continue to grow in the area. And as you know, that the RTP region, in general, is well known for being very diverse and welcoming. And that will just attract more immigrants, attract more Asian Americans to come to the area to live, work, and play, because it's such a welcoming community to live in.
Yeah, it really is.
Mhm.
In the community.
Shawn?
And one thing I just wanted to add very quickly is it's funny, I remember, a year ago now when the Asian American Center, or 2 years ago when the Asian American Center was still in the process of being created at UNC, having conversations with the chancellor and the provost and sitting down with them and explaining that, creating an Asian American Center will be a tremendous investment, right? Because as of all this and rest I've been saying is that the growth in the state will be tremendous, right? And so as more Asian Americans settle in North Carolina, more of those children come to the flagship university of UNC Chapel Hill, it's going to produce so many dividends and returns, whether that's philanthropically, research-wise, et cetera. And so really, it just makes so much sense for this state, whether educational institutions or other public institutions, to invest and be aware of their Asian American populations.
Hey, Reza, just very quickly, we moved to the beach from Durham in October, and we're in Onslow County, and I'm the only Asian here. So you're invited all to come to Onslow County, please, to be my neighbors.
See you tomorrow. So Rita, do we have any other questions from the chat box?
Actually, there is a question from me, and audience members, if you have a question, just raise your hand or please use the chat function. So this may be out of scope for tonight's discussion, but I'm wondering if any of the panelists could maybe talk about Asian American activism with regards to the situation in Myanmar and our US government's approach to the recent coup. And Shawn, is the Asian Center at UNC active in any of that kind of awareness?
Well, just really quickly, there is a distinction between Asian and Asian American, and so
Correct.
on campus there's the Carolina Asia Center, which is all about things in the East, in Asia.
Right.
And for Shawn, the focus is on the
Asian American
part.
Yes.
Yeah. So Shawn, if you wanted to.
Sure. I would say, I know at least the Asian American Center hasn't been too involved with Myanmar activities or what's happening over there. But I know, at least I've, as a resident of Chapel Hill, I've seen that there's been some local rallies organized on behalf of support. In regards to the Carolina Asia Center and what stances or activities they're doing, I'm not too sure on that. And I don't feel knowledgeable enough to speak in regards to Asian American activism in regards to that situation either. But that's a very good question.
Yeah, I could take a stab on it. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I do believe that we're close to closing the first chapter of the presidency of Joseph R. Biden, which I think has been A+ in terms of vaccinating the American people, getting the pandemic to the point now where we can gather, reading the goals that he set. And I think it's proof that government can work to execute, now investing about $6 trillion to get our economy moving again. I think the next step for this presidency, I think it's something that we have to look at as foreign policy. And the United States now, his first test was Israel, Gaza. We're not clear where he stands on China, really, whether we're going to re-enter the Iran deal. But I think Myanmar, I really appreciate your question, because I don't think we're not hearing about this issue a lot. And I think the United States, I read a lot, but this is one area that I haven't really read a lot about. But I think that the US policy has really never been that consistent in this part of the world. So I think we've got to make sure that the United States of America is defending democracy and freedom in every nation in the world. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of talk about border issues and China, and now there's a big, and I'm going to talk at the end of this talk about India, just to tell you all what's going on there. But my answer to your question is I think we're missing out on a chance to be very clear that we need to have a consistent foreign policy with these kinds of dictatorships, and not accept them, and just I don't know whether we do that through military intervention. We're pulling out of Afghanistan. As we pull out troops, do we look at that? Right? So I hope that answers your question, but you've given me some reason to go learn about Myanmar now. So.
Yeah, I want to make a point that I really think the activism in the Asian community is still at its infancy stage, and we have still much to learn and much to grow, and we can learn from our brothers and sisters, our African American community, right? I think the activism in the African American community, has been very visible in the mainstream, but we are getting there. I think as Asian American community, our voice is getting louder, and we are becoming increasingly aware that we need to fight for our rights, and to stand on our own, right? And we cannot let them divide us, having that model minority, like hat on us, and I think that we should unite with other minority communities and fight for our rights together. But we still have a lot to grow.
So there is another question in the chat from Jocelyn, and she asks, what are ways that you take care of yourself? I know microaggressions and having your identity constantly questioned is emotionally draining.
Yeah. Are you talking in general about just how do we all deal with these kinds of stresses every day? Oh, yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
take a stab at that. Steve, when I actually met my wife in the Philippines. She's an American girl. It's a long story, but we ended up in Philadelphia. And in the 80s at that time, being married to a quote, a foreigner, wasn't the very, usual. And so people stare at me, people stare at us. And in fact, when we had our 2 kids, they always ask us, when my wife goes shopping, one of my sons is a little bit darker, and they ask him, said, is this kid really your son? So you experience that every day. And every day, it's all about your attitude and how you respond to it. You could either be aggressive back and be ugly about it, or you can just ignore the person, and my tendency is to fight. And with my wife, it's like, hey, calm down, and they're ignorant. So the way I look at this is that, these people, karma will come back to them, number one. And number two is that they're really ignorant. They don't know the history of being Asian. They don't know the history of the fact that there's 50 ethnic groups within the American Asian community. Can you imagine it? 50 ethnic groups, Filipinos, Chinese, Vietnamese. There's a lot of us. And it's hard to learn that overnight, right? So, education is still the key, but you can be, it's what I call the circle of influence. If you can't, outside of that circle you can influence, then leave it be and walk away, because you could never change them.
Yeah. Well, the one way that I take care of myself, and it does get extremely stressful, I want to begin with just, you talk about microaggression. I mean, right now, as we speak in the nation of India, 4,400 people are dying a day. Just in this week alone, I have spoken to over 50 Indian Americans who, and I apologize if I get emotional, whose moms and dads are dying, who cannot get there, and who cannot say bye to their loved ones. That's hard to deal with. So I've been getting some anxiety attacks myself. On top of that, you see the hatred that occurs. So the best way I take care of myself is I'm a voracious exerciser. I was a former athlete. So 2 days ago, I ran 9 miles with our fire department, to honor the 9 seconds of George Floyd, 9 miles. I was dead. I'm 50 years old, but it felt really great. Play tennis, swim, meditate, try to control the moment we're in. And I think things are always going to be better if we can stop and ask ourselves how we can make them better. So that's how I relax myself, as I try to, before I go to bed, think of all the positive things in my life. It's hard sometimes. Your family, your God, the light. Light always overcomes darkness. But our light doesn't have to be dependent on the darkness around us. So each of us here today, we're here because there's tremendous love and light in our hearts. And that's what gets me through dealing with the microaggression. The final point I'll make about, just because I wanted to make this point before I leave, I got really moved when I saw Fareed Zakaria's eulogy on his show GPS, Global Public Square, which is about, he's a renowned journalist. And he gave a eulogy for his mother, Fatima Zakaria, who died from COVID-19. And she was the reason that she was a renowned journalist, ran the India Times. But he made this point that we often look at immigration as a positive thing. And we forget the tears of a mother who left her children leave to come to another country. And each one of you have left, like, Ed, Yalu, they've left the parents. My parents left their parents. But what he felt was such a distance the distance of immigration, right? When someone can't say bye to the mother because she's dying of COVID-19, that's really sad, right? So I hope we can pray for India. I'll be sharing in the chat in an email some of the efforts I'm going on right now with the Indian embassy, with leaders like John Chambers, former CEO of Cisco. He's doing a podcast. He's going to be doing one this weekend with Indian tech companies to help raise money. And he's from my home state of West Virginia. But I didn't mean to go over, but I just wanted to make that point. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. In terms of microaggressions, there are so many times where people don't even realize that it's a microaggression. And then if you think about that, on the other side of it is that you've had so many microaggressions happen that it's hurtful and also laughable at the same time.
Yeah.
So the way I deal with it is through humor and through information. And one of those things, gathering information to be able to put a program like this together, or gathering information and support to create the Southern Mix oral history project together. So that's how I deal with those kinds of things. But it's also an opportunity for me to realize that I have to question some of my own biases as well, because I grew up in a place in a town, Raleigh was a lot more diverse than Fuquay-Varina when we were there for a while. We were the only other in town. And Ed knows this now, being in Onslow County. And people, you realize that you get used to seeing others around you in black and white. And so for me to walk into a room and I'm not black or white, then of course that's going to raise questions, especially if you have any curiosity.
Yes.
So when even a microaggression can be seen as an opportunity for education for myself and for the other person. So yeah. I know that there are some others. I know that Senator Fushi was wanting to join the call. I don't know if she's still on the call. Rita, are you able to check?
She is not. She just disconnected recently. She was here for the bulk of it.
Okay. I'll catch up with her about that. But I did want in the last few minutes to, if we can unmute everyone who, and certainly if you want to mute yourself, that's fine, but I didn't want to miss any opportunity to hear other callers. So I'd like to hear if anyone is willing to ask questions now. Let's see.
I have to leave.
Don't be shy.
Go ahead. I have to leave at 7:30 because I have a
Okay,
pick up my
Okay.
daughter. But thank you so much.
thanks. I know that Aviana was someone we met just as we were starting the call. Aviana, if you have any questions.
Hi, you all have been so generous in sharing your stories. I feel like I should just put myself out there a little bit. I'm from Chatham County. My mom's family has been there for several generations. My dad came from Bangladesh for college in the 70s, first to New Hampshire, and then came to North Carolina and was here in Chapel Hill and Raleigh for maybe 15 years. And I definitely had that experience growing up in Chatham County of feeling like the only other. So glad that I had my little brother there with me. We're both still local kids. I went to college in Raleigh at Meredith, and going back home to Chapel Hill, or to Chatham County rather, and seeing other people there. I was at Jordan Lake during the pandemic, and it was the first time I think that I had ever been around, within a mile of where I grew up, and saw another family of Asian people. And I was that awful person, sort of, like almost gawking or in awe of the whole situation. And still going back to Chatham County now, it's like, wow, I just, you never think that in your lifetime you're going to see something like that. Even just seeing that this event was going on from the Chatham County Library was like, I feel like I've come out of some like wilderness that I was stuck in, So maybe I should cut myself off there, because I'm just sort of had no intention of really sharing.
No, I'm so glad that you are sharing. And
Oh, we appreciate it. And you're not the only one. I want to thank you so much. I mean, we all get comfortable in our own kind of lanes. And I think sometimes it takes a lot of courage to learn and to share the different experiences. So we appreciate it. And it's all about building bridges, right, with each other. And sometimes that means learning from different cultures and learning about different experiences, which make us more complete. But in today's society, it's so easy just to know what's going on in the news and focusing on your job or whatever, right? And I think we really appreciate you being so willing to have a conversation.
right.
Thanks.
And Jefferson, I see you've unmuted. Did you have any thoughts to share?
Don't know. I'm actually a foreigner, not even close to. I'm right now in the UK, so.
Jefferson, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Hi, Ed. How have you been?
Good.
I saw this on the AAPI group chat, and I thought, why not?
So you're joining from the UK? Thank you for joining.
Yeah. I've always liked, or at least the idealism of what America is. But of course, I recognize this is a story that's still ongoing.
Yes.
Still needs a lot of writing.
Yes. Yes.
But tell them the good news, Jefferson.
At this point, the whole state might as well know. But I'm moving down to Durham in August for my master's.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Go Duke.
So I'm very lucky for that. And also at the same time, I'm lucky because I don't think I could have pulled it off if it wasn't for me knowing Ed, Gracie, and a lot of people that I worked with on the campaign trail to help out the Biden campaign. And so I want to make something for myself in America so that I can take care of myself, take care of my family. But at the same time also, if or when I make it, I also want to give back. to the people around me who have also helped me get this far.
I'm just going to say a quick thing, Jefferson. He has been in our phone banking for so many times that, you know, it's like, it's Jefferson again. And I don't know what time is it in England, but he was phone banking, man, calling all those voters to go out and vote.
Wow.
So thank you. So thank you,
Well,
Jefferson.
I want to thank all of you for letting me be with you today. I'm sorry I have a sharp heart.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
But no, I want to thank everybody for organizing this event. And I think I'm always here to support you all in any way. And I think we're achieving a lot together as a community. And we're, you know, I love to speak in metaphors. And so my metaphor of the day is that, you know, we're on a remarkable journey in America. And on any flight, if you have the right people in charge, the captain, the right crew, and a destination, there's a limit to where you can go. And the beauty in America is where crew comes from everywhere. And we can all be Americans and keep flying high. And so we're in a period of turbulence right now. But once we reach a comfortable cruising altitude, we'll be serving a meal on the plane.
And Steve, I can get my beer.
My council members always get scared when I speak because they never know where I'm going with my metaphors.
If I could just speak on behalf of the Chatham Community Library, knowing that we are still considered very much a rural county with a very small Asian American population, this is why we're here tonight. This is why we've brought this group together. We want to be the conduit for these conversations and for awareness. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any parting words from Ya or Shawn?
It's such an honor to be here and have such a great conversation with you all. And I look forward to more events and programs like this in the future that get our young people in your community excited and engaged. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah. Ed, Shawn?
Well, one last thing. I just wanted to thank you, Reza, for putting this together. I recently been involved with Reza with the AAPI Heritage Month planning, and she is an excellent writer and a great human being. So I truly appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that everyone has said. Thank you all, and hope everyone takes care tonight.
Thanks, Shawn. Welcome back from the
All
Virgin
right.
Islands.
Thank you so much for having us.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, Evie.
Thanks to everyone who came out tonight.
Thank you.